Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're diving into the life of someone truly remarkable, a man who his peers, including Indonesia's first president Sukarno, affectionately called the Grand Old Man. We're talking about Haji Agus Salim. You know, while history loves to focus heavily on battlefield generals and armed conflict, Salim's sheer intellect, his unmatched diplomatic tact, and his razor-sharp wit were honestly just as vital to Indonesian independence as any military victory. He was a master diplomat, an Islamic scholar, and a key founding statesman whose legacy is literally still shaping the nation today.
It's a pretty fascinating question, isn't it? Just picture this scenario for a second. You've got this newly declared republic, it's facing an immediate military reinvasion by the Dutch, and it's desperately trying to survive on the world stage. And defending it? Well, you have a man who completely shunned material wealth, had zero formal military backing, but possessed an intellect so formidable he was basically running circles around European diplomats. Today, we're going to unpack exactly how Haji Agus Salim used his incredibly unique set of skills to secure the survival of a brand new nation.
So, to understand the statesman, we really have to start with the boy, the genius polyglot. He was born on October 8, 1884, in West Sumatra. Interestingly enough, he wasn't originally named Agus Salim. His birth name was actually Mashudul Haq. In Arabic, that translates perfectly to one who searches for truth. And honestly, rarely has a name been so spot on for a person's life trajectory. As the son of a high-ranking court official in the Dutch colonial judiciary, he got a very unique inside vantage point on the colonial system right from the get-go. And that foundational brilliance, it became undeniably apparent during his school years. He went to this highly prestigious elite Dutch school, the HBS, over in Batavia, which is modern-day Jakarta. Now, access to that level of education for native Indonesians back then was exceptionally rare. But Salim didn't just attend, he completely dominated. By 1903, he graduated as the absolute top student across the entire Dutch East Indies. It was kind of an early warning sign to the colonial establishment that they were dealing with a staggering intellect.
But his true superpower first emerged in his linguistic genius. He didn't just pick up a few local dialects here and there. The guy mastered at least 9 distinct languages. I mean, we're talking about Indonesian, Minangkabau, Dutch, English, French, German, Arabic, Turkish, and Japanese. This wasn't just some parlor trick for impressing party guests either. In an era where international communication was incredibly slow and complicated, carrying 9 languages in your head essentially made you a one-man diplomatic powerhouse. It became, without a doubt, his absolute greatest weapon.
His path wasn't totally smooth, though. After graduating at the top of his class, he actually wanted to go study medicine in Europe. But shockingly, the Dutch authorities outright denied him a scholarship. That initial setback, however, turned into an incredible opportunity. Instead of heading to Europe, he took a job as a translator and clerk at the Dutch consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. That unconventional 5-year stay, from 1906 to 1911, was the crucible that really forged his worldview. He performed the Hajj, he deeply studied Islamic theology, and critically, he mastered all the complex intricacies of international diplomatic protocol. When Salim finally returned to Java in 1915, he brought this massive, highly refined intellect with him, stepping directly into his role as an architect of a republic. He threw himself straight into the national independence movement. He wasn't just sitting around theorizing, he was an active organizer. He joined Sarekat Islam, the very first true mass political movement in Indonesia, and very quickly rose to become second in command alongside the legendary HOS Cokroaminoto. He was now deeply involved in designing the blueprint for a future, free republic. But inside Sarekat Islam, he immediately hit a wall of extreme internal politics. A major ideological fracture was happening at the time. You had a faction, led by figures like Saman, pushing to steer the massive organization toward Marxist doctrine, essentially aiming for a communist takeover from within. On the other side, Salim utilized his sharp debate skills and deep theological knowledge to intellectually counter them. He successfully argued that the movement's core struggle for liberation had to remain firmly grounded in its original Islamic principles, ultimately preventing that ideological shift. Fast forward a bit to 1945. World War II is wrapping up. The Japanese occupation of Indonesia is waning, and Salim is now widely recognized as a vital elder statesman. He becomes a member of the BPUPKI. That's the Committee Preparing for Independence. But even more importantly, he's appointed to the Committee of 9, alongside towering figures like Sukarno and Muhammad Hatta. Together, in June of '45, they co-drafted the Jakarta Charter.
This document was absolutely monumental. It laid the direct philosophical and legal groundwork for the Indonesian constitution and the state ideology known as Pancasila.
Now, declaring independence on August 17, 1945, was really just the beginning. The newly born republic immediately faced a massive existential threat. Dutch forces returned, looking to forcefully reclaim their former colony. And this brings us right to the climax of Salim's story, stepping up as a diplomat for a new nation. While guerrilla fighters took to the jungles and the streets to fight with bullets, Salim was sent onto the international stage to fight for his country's survival using words. His diplomatic rise was lightning fast. First appointed as deputy foreign minister and later foreign minister, he spearheaded a critical delegation to the Middle East in June 1947. He utilized absolutely everything he had learned in Jeddah decades earlier: his deep charisma, the shared religious bond of Islam, and his absolute flawless fluency in Arabic. Later that same year, he and Sultan Shahar flew to New York to defend Indonesia at the UN Security Council. They brilliantly managed to turn global public opinion squarely against the Dutch military offenses. The tangible historical impact of that Middle Eastern mission was just monumental. Because of Salim's masterful diplomacy, Egypt became the very first nation in the entire world to extend de jure recognition to the Republic of Indonesia on June 10, 1947. Now, in international law, securing that first official state recognition is the absolute hardest and most important hurdle. Egypt's recognition completely opened the floodgates. They were quickly followed by Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia, giving Indonesia the absolute legitimacy it desperately needed to survive. You know, it's incredibly easy to look at these massive geopolitical achievements and totally lose sight of the man himself. So I want to bring the story back down to a deeply personal level and talk about the humble, witty statesman. Who was Haji Agus Salim when the diplomatic cameras stopped rolling? Well, despite his massive global influence, his personal character was defined by an unapologetic modesty, a razor-sharp sense of humor, and just a total, absolute lack of ambition for any material wealth. His life was basically defined by this stark, almost unbelievable contrast. On one hand, you have a minister of state and a UN delegate literally moving pieces on the global chessboard. But on the other hand, in his personal life, Salim lived in rented, largely unfurnished houses. Half the time, they didn't even have electricity. He and his family moved from one humble room to another. He didn't have servants. He famously repaired his own roof, patched his own shoes, and fixed his own furniture. His mind was entirely focused on the state, never on his own personal comfort. And that fierce independence definitely extended to how he raised his family. Because he was so completely disillusioned with the structural inequality of colonial schooling, the very same system he had topped as a young man, mind you, he and his wife made a pretty radical choice. They completely rejected formal colonial education for their children. Instead, Salim literally homeschooled all of them directly at their kitchen table. He personally taught them multiple languages, history, and science, passing down his vast knowledge without ever compromising his anti-colonial principles. But perhaps absolutely nothing captures his personality better than his legendary wit. There's this story of a formal diplomatic reception in London where an arrogant Dutch diplomat attempted to publicly mock Salim. Salim was smoking a traditional Javanese kretek, a clove cigarette, and the diplomat loudly complained about its pungent smell. Without missing a single beat, Salim calmly delivered this absolute knockout of a response, completely shutting down the diplomat and casually highlighting centuries of colonial exploitation in one brilliant, calm sentence. Just incredible. After securing Indonesia's place in the world, Salim retired from active diplomacy in the early 1950s. But he sure didn't stop teaching. He spent his final years sharing his vast knowledge globally, even lecturing over at Cornell University in the United States. He passed away in Jakarta on November 4, 1954, at the age of 70, and was rightfully buried at the Kalibata Heroes Cemetery. In 1961, President Sukarno officially declared him a national hero, and today you can see his enduring physical legacy mapped directly onto the country, with major thoroughfares in Indonesian cities proudly bearing the name Jalan Haji Agus Salim. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this thought. Haji Agus Salim achieved things on a global scale that most leaders only ever dream of. Yet he did it all while living in rented rooms, without electricity, completely refusing to enrich himself. He used his genius entirely for the birth of his nation and never for his own pocket. Ask yourself, when we look around at the landscape of global leadership today, how often do we truly see that rare combination? It's a powerful standard and a legacy that absolutely continues to command awe and respect. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the life of the grand old man.